Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to God's Grace on Thee and Angel Wallace Productions. Today is Friday. It is the 17th of January of 2024. Of 2025. I wanted to get into a reading. The last reading I did was the last chapter of Volume 4. So I prayed this morning to the Lord and I asked Him to bring me to something that He wanted me to bring to your attention. And so I went back into the original files of all the journals and I came across this. And it's an article basically in a newspaper, in the news journals, I should say. So let us begin. And I'm going to start just in the middle. Let me say something to you as a people of world citizenship. You are in the sorting of God's people from the ones who wish to follow this evil empire. And we are now dealing with God's adversary, who is restricted to the mortal physical plane. The intent is to take the planet Earth, Shan, and then move outward into space. It will not be allowed, and there will be massive effort to hold the beings of Earth hostage. Well, sorry about this, Earthman. God does not compromise, nor does He negotiate. You each will either on one side or the other, and to not make a decision is to already have made one. All manner of terrible things are in the planning by the deceivers to perpetrate upon you in the guise of it being space brothers. No, but you will buy the tale in great masses. However, if you, the people of the United States of America, fail to fall for the lie, you will prevail, and the world shall be turned about, for God will work with you if your intent is truth and honor. He will not do it for you. If your intent remains to continue the breaking of every law of God and the creation, you are responsible for that which comes upon you, and it shall come upon you in a most devastating manner, for we will only airlift out God's people. We have no authority to remove any who practice evil, for those ones are not welcome in the balanced societies of the cosmos. So be it. Now, if you turn around the government of the United States, the chosen people in place of God, you can reclaim your planet. What else do you have to do with even a tenth as much wondrous challenge and excitement? You are a bored and sleepy civilization. Stop watching the play on your pretend screens. Get into the game, dear friends. God has sent us, His hosts, to play with you. We have no intention of competing with you, for our enemy is the adversary of God, and we need not a three-ring circus. No one shall be coerced or forced. You will be in the choosing. Lawyers who have lawyers. Oh my, yes you do. However, since you once failed to know anything about your Constitution, I get to lay another heavy trip on you. How many amendments do you have? Do you know that it is unconstitutional for a lawyer to be elected to Congress? And what does your 13th Amendment say? Well, now it reads, neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. But not so. That was the 14th Amendment I just cited. The original 13th Amendment reads as follows. If any citizen of the United States shall accept, claim, receive, or retain any title of nobility or honor, or shall without consent of Congress accept and retain any present, pension, office, or emolument of any kind whatever from any emperor, king, prince, or foreign power, such person shall cease to be a citizen of the United States and shall be incapable of holding any office of trust or profit under them or either of them. Thank you, David Dodge, researcher, and Alfred Adesk, editor, Anti-Shyster, August 1991. These ones also give you a special version of the Pledge of Allegiance, and you might consider, for it says what the original meant and ceased to be accepted. I pledge allegiance to the Constitution of the United States of America and to the republic that honors that Constitution, one nation under God, with liberty and justice for all. Now, the missing 13th Amendment, titles of nobility and honor, are as follows. In the winter of 1983, archival research expert David Dodge and former Baltimore police investigator Tom Dunn were searching for evidence of government corruption in public records stored in the Belfast Library on the coast of Maine. By chance, and in the kill box, Hatton states, ? I think not. Well, they discovered the library's oldest authentic copy of the Constitution of the United States, printed in 1825. Now, both men were stunned to see this document include a 13th Amendment that no longer appears on current copies of the Constitution. Moreover, after studying the amendment's language and historical context, they realized the principal intent of this missing 13th Amendment was to prohibit lawyers from serving in government. So, began a 7-year nationwide search for the truth surrounding the most bizarre constitutional puzzle in American history. The unlawful removal of a ratified amendment from the Constitution of the United States. Since 1983, Dodge and Dunn have uncovered additional copies of the Constitution, with the missing 13th Amendment printed in at least 18 separate publications by 10 different states and territories over the 4 decades from 1822 to 1860. Now, in June of this year, 1991, Dodge uncovered the evidence that this missing 13th Amendment had indeed been lawfully ratified by the state of Virginia and was therefore an authentic amendment to the American Constitution. Now, the evidence is correct and no errors were found. A 13th Amendment restricting lawyers from serving in government was ratified in 1819 and removed from your Constitution during the tumult of the Civil War deliberately. Now, since the amendment was never lawfully repealed, it is still the law today. So wouldn't you now guess that the implications are enormous? The story of this missing amendment is complex and at times confusing because the political issues and vocabulary of the American Revolution were different from your own. However, there are essentially 2 issues. What does the amendment mean, and was the amendment ratified? So let's look first at the meaning. The missing 13th Amendment to the Constitution of the United States reads as above cited. At first reading, the meaning of this 13th Amendment, also called the Title of Nobility Amendment, seems a bit obscure, unimportant. The references to nobility, honor, emperor, king, and prince lead you to dismiss this amendment as a petty post-revolution act of spite directed against the British monarchy. But in your modern world of Lady Di and Prince Charles, anti-royalist sentiments seem so archaic and quaint that the amendment can be ignored. Not so. Consider some real hard evidence of its historical significance. First, the titles of nobility were prohibited in both Article 6 of the Articles of Confederation of 1777 and in Article 1, Section 9 of the Constitution of the United States, 1788. And second, although already prohibited by the Constitution, an additional title of nobility amendment was proposed in 1789, again in 1810, and was finally ratified in 1819. So clearly, the Founding Fathers saw such a serious threat in titles of nobility and honors that anyone receiving them would forfeit their citizenship. So how about Sir Schwarzkopf and Sir Dr. Kissinger? Since the government prohibited titles of nobility several times over 4 decades and went through the amending process, even though titles of nobility were already prohibited by the Constitution, it was obvious that the amendment carried much more significance for our founding fathers than is readily apparent to you today. Let's look at the historical context. To understand the meaning of this missing 13th Amendment, you must understand its historical context, the era surrounding the American Revolution, which of course you are not taught. And you tend to regard the notion of democracy as benign, harmless, and politically unremarkable. But at the time of the American Revolution, King George III and the other monarchies of Europe saw democracy as an unnatural, ungodly, ideological threat, every bit as dangerously radical as communism. In the kill box, Hatton states, so the obvious solution was to turn democracy and communism into a method of creating what they wanted in the first place, a monarchy dictatorship, while calling it a nice label. And just as the 1917 communist revolution in Russia, in the kill box, Hatton states, financed by you nice people bankers, just as the so-called Soviet Revolution this week is sponsored and financed by the same people in your behalf, spawned other revolutions around the world. And the American Revolution provided an example and incentive for people all over the world to overthrow their European monarchies. So it was interpreted. Now, even though the Treaty of Paris ended the Revolutionary War in 1783, the simple fact of your existence threatened the monarchies. The United States stood as a heroic role model for other nations that inspired them to also struggle against oppressive monarchies. And the French Revolution from 1789 to 1799 and the Polish National Uprising of 1794 were in part encouraged by the American Revolution. And though you stood like a beacon of hope for most of the world, the monarchies regarded the United States as a political typhoid Mary, the principal source of radical democracy that was destroying monarchies around the world. And the monarchies must have realized that if the principal source of that infection could be destroyed, the rest of the world might avoid the contagion. The monarchies would be saved. Well, their survival at stake, the monarchies sought to destroy or subvert the American system of government. And knowing that they couldn't destroy you militarily, they resorted to more covert methods of political subversion, employing spies and secret agents skilled in bribery and legal deception. And it was perhaps the first Cold War. Since governments run on money, politicians run for money. And money is the usual enticement to commit treason. And much of the monarchy's counter-revolutionary efforts emanated from English banks. And don't bank on it. The essence of banking was once explained by Sir Josiah Stamp, a former president of the Bank of England. I have given this before, but it is such a dandy I shall repeat it. The modern banking system manufactures money out of nothing. Think of monopoly money. Now, the process is perhaps the most astounding sleight of hand that was ever invented. Banking was conceived in inequity, and born in sin. Bankers own the earth. Take it away from them, but leave them the power to create money, and with a flick of a pen, they will create enough money to buy it back again. Now take this great power away from them, and all great fortunes like mine will disappear. And they ought to disappear. For then this would be a better and happier world to live in. But if you want to continue to be the slaves of bankers and pay the cost of your own slavery, then let bankers continue to create money and control credit. One of the past great abuses of your banking system caused the Depression of the 1930s. And today's abuses are causing another and more massive depression than the world has ever known. Current S&L and bank scandals illustrate the ongoing relationships between banks, lawyers, politicians, and government agencies. And look at the current BCCI and the BNL scandals, running from high government officers to the presidency itself, involved in total criminal activities, such as the Federal Reserve, the FDIC, and even the CIA. Now, these scandals are the direct result of years of law breaking by an alliance of bankers and lawyers using their influence and money to corrupt the political process and rob the public. Think you're not going to be robbed? Well, guess who's going to pay the bill for the excesses of these bailouts? And as uninvolved parties attached to this present property scam scandal, they're finding other financial institutions involved, and as named in the investigation, find Solomon Brothers and other financial institutions who are kaput and haven't even been made public. Well, no wonder the FDIC and RTC are asking additional billions. The systematic robbery of productive individuals by parasite bankers and lawyers is not a recent phenomenon. This abuse is a human tradition that predates the Bible and spread from Europe to America despite early colonial prohibitions. Remember the Protocols of Zion? Well, try the issue on October the 1920, number 13. We have already established our own men in all important positions. We must endeavor to provide the Goyim, who are the non-Jews, and including Judeans and Hebrews, with lawyers and doctors. The lawyers are Al Quran, with all interest. And 14, but above all, let us monopolize education. By this means, we spread ideas that are useful to us and shape the children's brains as suits us. And then, 15, if one of our people should unhappily fall into the hands of justice amongst the Christians, we must rush to help him, find as many witnesses as he needs to save him from his judges, until we become judges ourselves. Now it's about time to again publish the protocols, friends, but I have quite a bit of additional updating to do prior to that, so let's hold up herein and not get sidetracked from the missing 13th Amendment. It is all tied in together, as you might have guessed by now, and you may as well consider that there is a total integration of the Protocols of Zion, the Cremu Manifesto, and the epistle emanating interest that these are published in a Rothschild magazine. The Prince of the Jews was done in 1489 AD. But then, who would ever think, most especially Gentiles, of connecting these things with other documents emanating from Jewry or with modern happenings? So be it. When the first United States Bank was chartered by Congress in 1790, there were only 3 state banks in existence. At one time, banks were prohibited by law in most states because many of the early settlers were all too familiar with the practices of the European goldsmith banks. Now, the goldsmith banks were safe houses. They were used to store clients' gold. And in exchange for the deposited gold, customers would issue notes or paper money which were redeemable in gold. Now, the goldsmith bankers quickly succumbed to the temptation to issue extra notes unbacked by gold. Why? Because the extra notes enriched the bankers by allowing them to buy property with notes for gold that they did not own, gold that did not even exist. Now, the colonists knew that bankers occasionally printed too much paper money, and they found themselves over-leveraged and caused a run on the bank. And if the bankers lacked sufficient gold to meet the demand, the paper money became the worthless, and the common citizens left holding the paper were ruined. So although over-leveraged banks were sometimes hung, the bankers continued printing extra money to increase their fortunes at the expense of the productive members of society. Now, the practice continues to this day and offers sweetheart loans to bank insiders, and even provides the foundation for deficit spending and your federal government's unbridled growth. If the colonists forgot the lessons of goldsmith bankers, the American Revolution refreshed their memories. To finance the war, Congress authorized the printing of continental bills of credit in an amount not to exceed $200 billion. The states issued another $200 billion in paper notes. Ultimately, the value of the paper money fell so low, they were soon traded on speculation from 500 to 1,000 paper bills for one coin. So it's then suggested that your Constitution's prohibition against paper economy. No state shall make anything but gold and silver coin a tender in payment of debts was a tool of the wealthy to be worked to the disadvantage of all others. But only in the paper economy can money reproduce itself and increase the claims of the wealthy at the expense of the productive. Paper money, said Pelatia Webster, polluted the equity of our laws and turned them into engines of oppression, corrupted the justice of our public administration, destroyed the fortunes of thousands who had confidence in it, and enervated the trade, laundry, husbandry, and manufacturers of our country, and went far to destroy the morality of our people. Conspiracies. Be patient. It may seem that I am not on the same subject, but I am. And a few examples of the attempts by the monarchies and the banks had almost succeeded in destroying the United States. And according to the Tennessee laws from 1715 to 1820, volume 11, page 774, in the 1794 Jay Treaty, the United States agreed to pay 600,000 pounds sterling to King George III as reparations for the American Revolution. Interesting, right? Well, the Senate ratified the treaty in secret session and ordered that it not be published. So when Benjamin Franklin's grandson published it anyway, the exposure and resulting public uproar was angered the Congress that it passed the Alien and Sedition Acts of 1798. So the federal judges could prosecute editors and publishers for reporting the truth about the government. And since you had won the Revolutionary War, why would your senators agree to pay reparations to the loser? And why would they agree to pay 600,000 pounds of sterling 11 years after the war ended? It just doesn't seem to make any sense, does it? Especially in light of the Senate's secrecy and later fury over being exposed. Unless you assume your senators had been bribed to serve the British monarchy and betray the American people, that, dear ones, is subversion. The United States Bank had been opposed by the Jeffersonians from the beginning, but the Federalists, the pro-monarchy party, won out in its establishment. The initial capitalization was $10 million, 80% of which would be owned by foreign bankers. Since the bank was authorized to lend up to $20 million, double its paid-in capital, it was a profitable deal for both government and the bankers, since they would lend and collect interest, usury, on $10 million. that did not exist. You getting the picture? However, the European bankers outfoxed the government, and by 1796, the government owed the bank $6 million, was forced to sell its shares. And by 1802, your government owned no stock in the United States Bank. The sheer power of the banks and their ability to influence representative government by economic manipulation and outright bribery was exposed in 1811, when the people discovered that European banking interests owned 80% of the bank. Congress therefore refused to renew the bank's charter, and this led to the withdrawal of $7 million in specie by European investors, which in turn precipitated an economic recession and the War of 1812. Now, there are other examples of the monarchy's efforts to subvert or destroy the United States. Some are common knowledge. Others remain to be disclosed to the public. And there is, for example, a book called 2 VA Law in the Library of Congress Law Library. This is an uncatalogued book in the rare book section that reveals a plan to overthrow the constitutional government by secret agreements engineered by the lawyers. And that, dear ones, is one reason that the 13th Amendment was ratified by Virginia and the notification lost in the mail. There is no public record of this book's existence. So does this sound surprising? Perish the thought of surprising. The Library of Congress has over 349,402 uncatalogued rare books and 13.9 million uncatalogued rare manuscripts, laws, and ratifications. There are secrets buried in that mass of documents even more astonishing than a missing constitutional amendment that I can well assure you. Titles of nobility. Now, in seeking to rule the world and destroy the United States, the bankers committed many crimes. Foremost among these crimes were fraud, conversion, and just plain old theft. And to escape the prosecution for their crimes, these bankers did the same thing any career criminal does. They hired and formed alliances with the best lawyers and judges money could buy. Now, these alliances, forged in Europe, particularly in Great Britain, spread to the colonies, later into the newly formed United States of America. And just as with Dharma and Oberle's legal case, the adversary lawyer, Mr. Horn, simply removes any papers from the file which can aid and assist the defendants. And when discovered, he then threatens all sorts of heinous consequences if his trick is revealed. What is this man's name? I thought you would never ask. It is spelled Stevenhorn. One of his threats is to get them. If this incident is revealed in any of the so-called Dharma's writings, well, old buddy, they have nothing to lose, but I do suggest that Mr. Horn does. Now remember, the part of the protocols about providing witnesses sufficient to win your case? Well, he did that too, but he outsmarted himself. The first hearing came with sufficient provided witnesses to swamp the court with liars. But he had presented a backup case petition, which caused the judge to disallow further proceedings at that time. So along with the presentation of the city, the clerk, and the city treasurer as defendants' witnesses, the liars did panic and disappear. So how handy, though, our attorneys have turned up one or two of them, and we shall see how well they like lying now. And despite their criminal foundation, these alliances forged in Europe generated wealth and ultimately respectability. And like any modern unit of organized crime, English bankers and lawyers wanted to be admired as legitimate businessmen, and as their criminal fortunes grew, so did their usefulness. So the British monarch legitimized these thieves by granting them titles of nobility. Oh my. So historically, the British peerage system referred to knights as squires, and to those who bore the knight's shields as esquires. Isn't this fun? As lances, shields, and physical violence gave way to more civilized means of theft, the pen grew mightier and far more profitable than the sword. And the clever wielders of those pens, bankers and lawyers, came to hold titles of nobility. The most common title was Esquire. That was used even today by lawyers. So the International Bar Association. In colonial America, the attorneys trained attorneys, but most held no title of nobility or honor. There was no requirement that one be a lawyer to hold the position of district attorney or attorney general or judge or a citizen's counsel of choice. That was not restricted to a lawyer. There were no state or national bar associations. The only organization that certified the lawyers was the International Bar Association. That was chartered by the King of England and headquartered out of London and closely associated with the international banking system. So the lawyers admitted to the IBA received the rank Esquires, which is a title of nobility. Now, Esquire was the principal title of nobility which the 13th Amendment sought to prohibit from the United States. Why? Well, because the loyalty of the Esquire lawyers was suspect. The bankers and the lawyers with an Esquire behind their names were agents of the monarchy and members of an organizations whose principal purposes were political, not economic, and regarded with the same wariness that some people today reserve for members of the KGB or the CIA. Article 1, Section 9 of the Constitution sought to prohibit the International Bar Association or any other agency that granted titles of nobility from operating in America. But the Constitution neglected to specify a penalty. So the prohibition was ignored and agents of the monarchy continued to infiltrate and influence the government, as in the Jay Treaty and the U.S. Bank Charter incidents. Therefore, a title of nobility amendment that specified a penalty, a loss of citizenship, was proposed in 1789 and again in 1810. The meaning of the amendment is seen in its intent to prohibit persons having titles of nobility and loyalties to foreign governments, and bankers from voting, holding public office, or using their skills to subvert the government. Honor. The missing amendment is referred to as the Title of Nobility Amendment, but the second prohibition against honor may be more significant. The archaic definition of honor as used when the 13th Amendment was ratified meant anyone obtaining or having an advantage or privilege over another. A contemporary example of an honor granted to only a few Americans is the privilege of being a judge. Now, lawyers can be judges and exercise the attendant privileges and powers. Non-lawyers cannot. By prohibiting honors, the missing amendment prohibits any advantage or privilege that would grant some citizens an unequal opportunity to achieve or exercise political power. Therefore, the second meaning or intent of the 13th Amendment is to ensure political equality among all American citizens by prohibiting anyone, even government officials, from claiming or exercising a special privilege or power and honor over other citizens. Now, the interpretation is quite true, little ones, and would be the key concept in the 13th Amendment. Why? Because while titles of nobility may no longer apply in today's political system, the concept of honor remains relevant. For example, Anyone who had a specific immunity from lawsuits which were not afforded to all citizens would be enjoying a separate privilege and honor, and would therefore forfeit his right to vote or hold public office. And think of the immunities from lawsuits that your judges, lawyers, politicians, and bureaucrats currently enjoy. And as another example, think of all the special interest legislation your government passes. Special interests are simply euphemisms for special privileges, honors. And what if the missing 13th Amendment were to be restored, special interests and immunities would be rendered unconstitutional? The prohibition against honors or privileges would compel the entire government to operate under the same laws as the citizens of your nation. Without their current personal immunities or honors, your judges and IRS agents would be unable to abuse common citizens without fear of legal liability. And if the 13th Amendment were restored, your entire government would have to conduct itself according to the same standards of decency, respect, law, and liability as the rest of the nation. And if this amendment and the term honor were applied today, your government's ability to systematically coerce and abuse the public would be all but eliminated. Just imagine. And can you imagine a government without special privileges or immunities? How could you even describe it? It would be almost like a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. Could it possibly be that the founding fathers intended it be that way? Imagine a government whose members were truly accountable to the public. A government that could not systematically exploit its own people. It's unheard of, for it got deliberately undone before it could be done. It has never been done before, and you thought a poor soul called Benedict Arnold was a traitor. You've never had a constitutional government as intended, not ever in the entire history of the world. So here comes the argument. Senator George Mitchell of Maine and the National Archives conceived this 13th Amendment was proposed by Congress in 1810. However, they explained that there were 17 states when Congress proposed the title of nobility. The amendment, that ratification required the support of 13 states, but since only 12 states supported the amendment, it was not ratified. Well, the government printing office hops on the bandwagon to agree. So it currently prints copies of the Constitution of the United States, which includes the title of Nobility Amendment as proposed, but unratified. So even if this 13th Amendment was never ratified, even if research would be flawed and only 12 states voted to ratify the amendment, wouldn't the possibility be wondrous to imagine? So what am I saying? Am I saying that it was a dream within a vote of historical utopia? No. I'm saying that it was ratified. And after a break, we shall continue to prove it. And dear ones of America and ones running for office with overwhelming odds against house cleaning, here are your tools to do the sweeping. Now, do you see the value of a good old space cadet with X-ray vision? It surely doesn't surprise any of you that this particular amendment would get lost.